Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to tell a story of the South, and the title of this week's lesson is Just Passing Through. Now, many of you know that I make my home in Arkansas, and if you've ever been to Arkansas, especially in the springtime, you probably had an opportunity to experience a spring storm. Here in the South, it's interesting because you can almost feel the storm coming before it happens. You can smell it in the air. It's that faint, musty smell that you know something's about to change. You see the wind begin to shift as it starts to transition from a gentle breeze and often into something a little more ominous. And off in the distance, what do you hear? The roll of thunder as the clouds begin to gather and the storm begins to build. And then as you're walking around, all of a sudden the brightness of the day begins to fade because the clouds begin to gather and they begin to fill the sky. The brightness of the day begins to turn to shades of gray. Birds go quiet. Dogs start barking, and many of them start heading to the doghouse because they know something ominous is coming. And then the leaves of the trees begin to rustle, and all of a sudden, a slow, quiet stillness fills the air around you. And then all of a sudden, it begins. At this point in time, the wind returns. And what had once been a stillness now is wind with a vengeance. You look at the trees and they begin to sway and dust begins to fill the air and the leaves start to roll across the pavement like a tumbleweed in a Western movie. The sky grows darker and darker and the rumble of the thunder draws closer. Flashes of lightning you saw in the distance now appear overhead as bolts of lightning jump between the clouds in the sky. And then, before you know it, the first raindrops begin to fall. Often initially they fall one by one, big, giant drops of rain that make a plopping sound when they hit the ground. And then after a few moments, it's not just solitary raindrops anymore. All of a sudden, it's what we in the South call a gully washer. It's a downpour. The rain begins to fall in sheets, and driven by the wind, it literally looks like waves of rain passing through the city. Lightning flashes across the sky and it lights up the darkness, and immediately following the lightning is the thunder. The walls and the windows of your house shake, and if you're standing outside, you can literally feel the thunder booming inside your chest. The trees bend and bow as the wind whips back and forth, and all of a sudden, as this downpour continues, the dry creek beds that have been waiting for some moisture all of a sudden become rushing torrents of water. Puddles begin to form in parking lots, and sometimes the rain is so intense that the wiper blades on your car can't keep up. Sometimes you've got to slow down, and at other times you've literally got to stop until the storm passes because it's difficult, if not impossible, to see the road in front of you. But what I love about a spring thunderstorm here in the South is as quickly as they start, the rain begins to slacken and the wind begins to subside, and the darkness and the grayness of the storm begins to once again be replaced by the light of the sun. A gentle moistness fills the air as the sun beams down from above. There's a freshness in the air as you sniff and smell it. And all of a sudden, you begin to hear the song of the birds once more. The dogs begin to exit their houses, and sniffing and looking around, they begin to go about doing what it is that dogs do. This is a storm in the southern United States. But did you notice what didn't happen? The storm didn't ask for permission to impact your day. It didn't ask if you were ready or prepared or if this sudden rainstorm was going to be an inconvenience to you in some way. The storm didn't send a text message or make a call or send an email that, hey, I'm coming. The storm simply showed up. Whether you were ready, whether you were prepared or not, the storm simply arrived. And that's the way the storms work. They don't drift in politely. They come in with authority. They bring wind, they bring rain, and sometimes they bring hail. Now, here in the South, they can also spawn tornadoes, and that to me is a reminder that nature can not only be abrupt, but it can be violent as well. A storm can cancel our day, it can disrupt our schedule, and it can force us to stop doing what we're doing, and attention is immediately drawn to what's happening outside. You know, it's interesting. Throughout history, storms have always demanded attention. You know, long before there were weather apps or Doppler radar or emergency alerts, storms shaped human history. Ancient sailors feared them, not because the storms were rare, but because the storms were humbling. A glassy sea could shift in minutes, and what was once smooth sailing could become violent chaos by midday. In fact, when you have an opportunity to search the depths of the ocean, what do we find? Many, many ships that were sank because of storms at sea. And what I find as you study history is the fact that many civilizations learn the hard way that you can't negotiate with the wind and the waves of a storm. You know, if we think about our early explorative history as a species here on this earth, think about what happened. For many, many centuries, countless ships left the safety of a harbor full of confidence, their sails billowing in the air, bold ambition as they set out to explore and to go where no one had gone before. But even as they did, many of these ships found themselves scattered by storms that didn't care about the rank or the privilege of the people on board. Storms are equal opportunity disruptors, and kings and commoners alike sadly discovered that when Mother Nature rears her ugly head, Mother Nature is in charge. Now, during World War II, probably one of the most consequential military decisions of the modern era, I'm talking about the D-Day invasion of Normandy, that event, that pivotal event in history, depended on the weather. If you don't know the story, let me tell you. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was planning the D-Day invasion, and as they were determining at what point they were going to send the ships across the English Channel to land at Normandy and attempt to repel the Germans and to end World War II, all of a sudden, Eisenhower found himself facing stormy conditions that could literally doom the operation. Now, the D-Day invasion required a very narrow window of calm sea to be able to get all of the men and all of the equipment to where it needed to go in record time. And a delay caused by a storm could end up costing countless lives and end up having the Allies lose momentum. If they went too early, it could be catastrophe. If they went too late, it could be a disaster. But the storm forced a decision. And as a result of that storm, history was changed because somebody, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, had to move, had to make a decision without having perfect certainty. You know, one of the things I love about storms is the fact that they don't stop history, but they do shape it. Storms test people. Storms reveal character. And once they pass, life continues. Now, that's important to remember because storms have always been a part of the human story. And in a way, it really makes storms a perfect metaphor for personal growth. Because all of us, every single one of us, are going to experience a season of storms in our lives. Now, sometimes it's a gentle rain, but other times it is a full-fledged thunderstorm that can really take us off our game if we're not aware. Now, one of the things you may have learned in school is the fact that storms have a life cycle. They're not just random events, they're created through a process. Now, spring storms often begin when warm air from the south meets cool air from the north. These two air masses of different temperature collide, and that collision creates a boundary, which is the dividing line in the atmosphere. And that boundary, that dividing line in the atmosphere, becomes a breeding ground for instability. And then there's one other factor that we often overlook, but it too is a major driver of the weather. And that contributor is the jet stream. You know, high above the earth, the jet stream acts like an invisible river of air. As it moves up and down across the continents, it moves warm air or cold air up and down across the land that it passes. And the jet stream, it moves incredibly fast. I know when I'm flying, as I do often, traveling to speak at different events across the United States and around the world, when we get into the jet stream, all of a sudden the plane finds itself moving faster than it could on its own. That wind, that jet stream not only moves fast, it moves with power. That massive airplane that we're in with hundreds of people on board and all of the cargo, when it gets into the jet stream, all of a sudden it accelerates in a way that it never accelerated before. But when it comes to the weather, the jet stream influences pressure systems. It influences weather patterns across entire continents. It drives storms in a way that a current can move a boat. So when we think about a storm, it's not just what we see, and that's the clouds directly above us or in the distance. There's a whole lot to a storm that we don't see, but the cycle remains the same. A storm builds, it intensifies, and then it peaks. And then the storm weakens, and then it dissipates, and it's over. As quickly as it started, it's gone. The wind's quiet, the rain slows, the clouds break, and the sunlight returns as if the storm never had the authority to come into our lives. Now, storms can be intense and they can be dangerous. Sometimes they can be destructive, but remember, storms are temporary. They're just passing through. And one of the most remarkable examples of nature is what happens after a powerful storm. And again, if you've lived here in the southern United States and you've ever stepped outside after a thunderstorm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. After the storm has just passed through, the world feels brand new all over again. I can tell you that the air smells clean and fresh. And if you're near the ocean or on a large body of water, there's something that happens that's even more profound. After a storm has brought chaos, the surface of the water all of a sudden becomes like glass. An incredible calm takes over the sea or the lake that you may find yourself on. And when the sun reappears, it reflects off that glassy surface, much like a mirror or a spotlight. You know, I've had the opportunity to see that as I've been on the Atlantic Ocean and I've been on the Pacific Ocean and I've been in the Gulf of America and other parts of the world, and I've seen storms come and I've seen them go. And before the storm, the ocean is angry, it's churning, it's unpredictable, and that storm is relentless. But after the storm passes and the winds settle down, that water becomes smooth and still and quiet and reflective. And those who are out on the ocean, all of a sudden, they find that their ability to lift their sails once again, that water becomes smooth and they can move faster than they could fighting the storm. And the sunlight, again, reflecting on that glassy surface, looks almost like something divine. Now, there's a lesson here, and if you haven't picked up on it already, let me share with you where I'm going with today's story. You and I, we all face storms in our lives. Well, that's a given. But I'm here to tell you this. The storms that you and I face in our lives, they're only temporary. Storms don't last forever. And ladies and gentlemen, after the storm, there's peace, there's tranquility, and there's calm. You know, many people report experiencing some of the greatest clarity in their lives, some of the greatest focus in their lives after they've come through a stormy season in their lives. Other people report a peace like they've never experienced before, having come through a stormy season. And still others say after they've gone through a stormy season, they experience more momentum and they're moving faster than they were before. Now, we may not appreciate clarity, our focus, our peace, our momentum while we're in the midst of the storm. But once we've been through the chaos and those things show up in our lives, all of a sudden we find value in those things. So yes, the storm is real. And yes, we're going to experience storms in our lives. It's part of the human condition, but so is the calm that follows. And if you're going through a stormy season in your life right now, don't forget what's on the other side. So let me kind of bring this to the message I want to get across today and tie the storms into what we're dealing with as part of personal growth. Storms aren't only weather. Storms are a part of life. And I don't care if you're a fellow martial artist or a business owner or a parent or a teacher or a student or a leader or someone who's simply trying to become a little bit better today than you were yesterday. I'm here to tell you this. The storms in life come for each and every one of us. And those storms in life show up in many forms. Now, sometimes the storms of life can take the shape of a physical form. We have an injury, we have a health scare, or we experience chronic fatigue or a pain that disrupts our day. Physical storms are a reminder that we're not invincible. Now, other times that storm can take the place of a financial storm. Maybe it's an unexpected expense, the loss of a job, a market downturn, debt that we didn't realize that was coming, and all of a sudden, that zero interest bonus that we had on a credit card went away, and now we're staring at a 24, 25% interest rate, and we don't know what we're going to do, or maybe the business of our dreams we launched has failed. Those financial storms, when we experience them, are real. And still, at other times, we can experience an emotional storm. Now, that could be grief or anxiety or depression. It could be anger or fear or loneliness or shame. It's those moments in our lives when we feel like we're experiencing a deluge of emotion, sheets and sheets of rain, literally drowning ourselves inside of our own mind. But maybe for you, the storm in life is a vocational storm. It's a career setback. It's a layoff. It's a missed promotion. It's feeling like you're stuck in a dead end job and you don't know what to do. Or maybe, just maybe, for you, it's a relational storm, and that storm is fueled by endless arguments with a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, or a loved one. Or maybe it's betrayal or divorce, or feeling like the people that you love don't understand you and they don't support you, and the people that you trust may have betrayed you. Now, for other people, maybe it's a mental storm of imposter syndrome or the fear of failure, or you're second guessing yourself, or struggling with low self-esteem, or you lack a belief in yourself. Now, those storms of life can also be professional storms. Maybe those are fueled by a dysfunctional team, leadership pressures that are weighing you down. Maybe it's new competition or it's staff turnover. Maybe it was a loss of a key account. All of a sudden, you find yourself getting sued, or now you find yourself in the middle of a conflict that you didn't start, you didn't cause, but now you're having to manage it. Things like this can cause you to question yourself and your calling. And lastly, if we find ourselves struggling to learn something new, or we find ourselves failing and having to start all over again, or failing and failing and failing some more, or we realize that we're lacking in some way, maybe the storm for us is an educational storm. But regardless of the storm that we face and how it manifests in our lives, we need to remember this important point. Some storms that we face are going to be brief. They're only going to last a short period of time. Other storms we face in life are going to be long. Some storms are going to be mild, but others feel like they're going to really uproot the very fabric of our lives. The hardest part about the storms of life is this: when we're in a storm, it rarely feels like it's going to be temporary. For most of us, when we find ourselves in a storm, we wonder if it's ever going to end, because that's what storms do. When they blow into our lives, they dominate our senses, they narrow our vision, and they convince us that this is all we're ever going to experience. And that's the lie the storm wants you to believe. Storms feel permanent because when we're in the storm, the pain that we may be experiencing is immersive. Think about it. When you're in pain, do you observe that pain casually? No, you live inside the pain. And if you're under financial stress, every bill screams louder, "You need to pay me now," even when the money's not there. And maybe you're experiencing a strained relationship, and if you're in a storm of a strained relationship, every silence feels heavier. When you're grieving, time slows down. When you're going through a storm, everything feels like it's upside down. When your confidence is low, even the simplest task feels hard. Your nervous system is going to interpret the storm as a threat, and threats demand attention. Now, it's in those moments that we tell ourselves, this is never going to end. We can't handle this. We're never going to recover, and nothing ever works out. I want you to understand this. This is storm language. This is storm thinking. It's understandable in the moment, but I'm here to tell you it's not true. Because when we're in the middle of a storm, when we're in the throes of a raging torrent, we forget that most of our lives is not lived in crisis. Most of the days that we live are not lived in tragedy. Think about it. Most of the days that you and I live are ordinary, and most of the seasons that we go through are manageable. But the storms that we face are dramatic. They can be loud, they can be disruptive, and that's why they dominate our memory. When storms arrive, they demand so much of our attention, we tend to forget how much good still exists in the world around us. Now, hear me when I say this. We forget that storms are chapters, not the whole book. Let me say that again. We forget that storms are chapters, not the whole book. Now, you may be in the midst of the storm, but the storm doesn't have to define who you are. Remember, the storm is a chapter, and you can choose to turn the page. So let me share with you 3 truths that you need to understand so you get it that you're just passing through the storms of life. First is this: the sun is always shining on the other side of the storm. You know, even when you can't see it, the sun is still there. Now, the storm clouds may block our view of the sun for a season, but I can tell you the storm clouds cannot erase the sun. And that's a reminder that hope still exists, even when hope feels invisible. Now, secondly, the winds are always calm on the other side of the storm. You know, if you're in the fury of a storm, it's easy to forget that on the other side of the storm, the winds are going to subside. The chaos that we find ourselves in right now is going to diminish. The pressure is going to drop. And all of a sudden, we're going to be able to pause and take a deep breath and take in the calm. You know, the third thing we need to remember when we're in a storm is this. Not only is the sun always shining on the other side of the storm, not only are the winds going to be calm on the other side of the storm, but the birds are always singing on the other side of the storm. I love the fact that nature is resilient, and birds don't need a perfect world to sing again. They just need for the storm to pass. You know, my grandfather told me early on that the birds sing in celebration that the storm has passed, and we should too. Now, it's important to remember that storms are temporary, but they're not without meaning. Sometimes the storm reveals what's already inside of you, waiting to be discovered, developed, and deployed. Some storms have the opportunity to refine us into a better version of who we are. They can make us better, faster, stronger. You know, some storms can even push us into making changes in our lives that we never would have chosen, but we later realize that's exactly what I needed. Now, there are storms that can break you, and often it's not because you weren't strong, but it's because you tried to carry what was never meant to be carried all by yourself. So, how do we pass through the storms of life without letting those storms define us? Well, let me give you an example from the world of the martial arts. You know, a martial artist understands something that the average person forgets. Pain is not proof that you're losing, because in martial arts, pain is often part of the training. And if you've ever tested for a belt rank in martial arts, you know exactly what I mean. Because testing is pressure. There's uncertainty. Your adrenaline is flowing, and over time, as you're exhibiting and putting out all of this energy to do all the forms, all the fighting, and the other things that are required, your body begins to get fatigued. And while you're doing this, it's about being watched, not only by your peers and maybe by others in the audience, it's the black belts that are observing every move you make. So you're nervous when you're performing, and you're trying to do your very best, even as your body is being pushed beyond what you may believe you're capable of doing. But somehow you find a way to get through it, And on the other side, there's calm and you get promoted. Now, that same principle is true in life. The storms of life that we go through are testing opportunities for us. The storm is a test, not to destroy you, but to reveal something that's inside of you, waiting to be discovered, developed, and deployed. That we call the black belt leader within. The storms of life are there to refine you and to actually show you what you're really made of. But you got to remember this. You cannot let the storm decide your destiny. You have to choose in advance to choose your own destiny before the storm arrives. Because if your identity depends on conditions, you're going to find yourselves fragile and easily broken in the midst of the storm. But if your identity is rooted in your purpose, in your values, in your faith, and in discipline, it doesn't matter what the storm throws at you. You're going to be able to withstand it and endure it. But you may say, John, I'm in the middle of a storm right now. This is great, but how do I make sure I don't drown in the midst of a storm? Well, let me give you 5 anchors, 5 thoughts that I want you to think about that can keep you from sinking if you're going through a storm right now. And you may want to remember these because if you're not going through one today, your storm may be tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. First, don't interpret the storm as punishment. It's important to remember that not everything that is painful is punishment. You heard that in my example of the martial artist training for and going through a belt advancement. Sometimes it's there to reveal to us something that we didn't know was there. Now, some storms are consequences, some choices that we made. Some storms in life are unavoidable. Some of the storms are random, and some storms are simply life happening to each and every one of us. Remember, the storm is not punishment. Often, the storm turns out to be, in retrospect, preparation, correction, or redirection. But sometimes the storm is just weather. So don't attach shame or blame to any season. Storms don't mean you're failing. Storms mean you're human. Now, the second anchor is this. Don't demand clarity in a downpour. You know, if you've ever driven in a storm, you know that heavy rain reduces visibility. And you can't see very far ahead if you're in a driving rainstorm. And guess what? The same is true in life. And if you're going through a heavy storm, it may require that you slow down. It may even require that you pause for a moment and wait for the storm to lessen and for some clarity to come. Now, the third anchor is this. You want to control what you can control. You know, you can't control the storm. You can't control how long it lasts, but you and I, we can control how we respond to the storms when they show up. Because when life gets chaotic, being in control is the calm that you need. So you want to focus on what you can control. Now, the fourth anchor is this. You want to keep moving forward. It's about being intentional, purposeful, and not getting distracted. Now, that's not because stopping is wrong. And sometimes if the storm is intense enough, you've got to pause for a moment. But understand this. If you stay stopped long enough, you may convince yourself that nothing is going to change and you never start moving again. So the goal is to keep moving, even if that moving is slow. Now, finally, in the fifth anchor is this. You want to let the storm refine you, not define you. A storm is going to clarify priorities. It's going to strip away distractions. A storm is going to reveal what really matters, and it's going to show you, if you use it properly, who you truly are on the inside. A storm rightly used can reveal to you that you're stronger than you thought, more resilient than you realized, and your faith in yourself is greater than you believed. Now, let me leave you with this. In 1914, explorer Ernest Shackleton and his ship, the Endurance, became trapped in the ice and was eventually crushed as he and his team were exploring the Antarctic. He and his men found themselves stranded in the most desolate place in the world. This was Shackleton's storm. So, how did he respond? He focused on what he could control. He kept the morale of his men alive. He maintained structure. He made decisions based on survival, not on ego. He led his men through months of brutal conditions, cold and hunger and exhaustion and fear. But here's the good news. He brought every single man home alive. The storm didn't stop him from leading. The storm revealed his leadership. And like Shackleton, your life isn't over just because a storm is present. The storm is present because life is moving. And remember, you're just passing through. Hey, I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day.